I woke up to find a bright orange bench sitting in the middle of my private overlook. And that is when I knew my life in Pine Ridge, Colorado was about to get complicated. The overlook had been the main reason I purchased this property 3 years ago. My name is Xavier Lawson, and I work remotely as a software consultant, which means I spend most of my days staring at screens. That little piece of land jutting out over the valley, with its sweeping views of the Rocky Mountains, had been my sanctuary. I would take my morning coffee out there, watch the elk graze in the meadow below, and feel like the luckiest guy in Colorado. But now there was this garish orange bench, bolted into the ground with metal brackets, sitting right in the center of my viewpoint. I stood there in my bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, staring at this thing like it had fallen from space. I pulled out my phone and called my neighbor, Rick, who had lived in the Pine Ridge mountain community for over a decade. "Rick, did you see what they put on my overlook?" "Oh yeah," Rick said with a tired laugh. "I saw the HOA crew out there yesterday afternoon. Figured you were at work and did not notice." "The HOA? What the hell are they doing putting furniture on my property?" "Well, that's the thing, Xavier. According to the HOA, that overlook is technically common area, something about the original development plans from 2008. There was a whole thing about it at the meeting last month." "What meeting?" "The one they sent the email about. You probably deleted it. I delete most of mine." I hung up and immediately started digging through my email trash. Sure enough, there it was, a lengthy email from Patricia Hendricks, the HOA president, detailing proposed improvements to common areas throughout the community. Buried in paragraph 7 of a 12-paragraph email was a single line about installing benches at scenic overlooks for community enjoyment. I had assumed the overlook was mine. The property survey I received at closing showed my lot extending to that point. I marched back inside and pulled out all my closing documents, spreading them across my dining room table. The survey clearly showed the overlook as part of my parcel, but there was also an easement notation I had never paid much attention to, something about community access and maintenance rights. My phone rang. It was an unknown local number. "Hello, is this Xavier Lawson?" A woman's voice, sharp and officious. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Patricia Hendricks, president of the Pine Ridge Mountain Community HOA. I am calling because our groundskeeper reported seeing you examining the new community bench we installed yesterday. I wanted to reach out personally to thank you for being such a cooperative homeowner." "Cooperative? I didn't agree to anything. That's my property." "Actually, Mr. Lawson, if you review your HOA documents, you will see that Overlook is designated as a community scenic point with an access easement. While the land may fall within your property boundaries, the HOA has the right to maintain and improve it for community use. You can't just install things without asking me first. We sent notice to all homeowners 3 weeks ago. The vote passed with 73% approval. I never got a vote. The email served as notice. Failure to respond is counted as an affirmative vote per our bylaws, Section 4.3. I felt my jaw clench. That's ridiculous. You're telling me not responding means I said yes. Those are the rules you agreed to when you purchased your home, Mr. Lawson. Now, I hope you will enjoy the bench. We chose that lovely safety orange color because it is visible from the road and adds a cheerful pop of color to the landscape. Good day." She hung up before I could respond. I spent the next hour reading through the HOA bylaws, a document I had skimmed once during closing and never looked at again. The legalese was dense, but Patricia was technically right. There was an easement on the overlook, and the HOA did have rights to make improvements. But the bylaws also stated that any improvements had to be reasonable and in keeping with the natural character of the community. A bright orange bench visible from space was not reasonable. I decided to take the diplomatic approach first. I got dressed, walked down the hill to Patricia's house, and knocked on her door. She lived in one of the larger homes near the community entrance, a sprawling ranch-style place with an immaculate lawn and flower beds that looked like they were maintained with surgical precision. Patricia answered the door wearing a cream-colored pantsuit, despite it being a Saturday morning. She was probably in her mid-50s, with blonde hair styled in that precise way that requires weekly salon visits, and she looked at me like I was a door-to-door salesman. "Mr. Lawson, what can I do for you?" I wanted to talk about the bench, in person. She sighed. "Please come in." Her living room was decorated in various shades of beige and white. Everything looked expensive and uncomfortable. She gestured to a chair that seemed designed more for appearance than actual sitting. "Mrs. Hendricks, I understand the HOA has easement rights, but that overlook is important to me. It is why I bought my house. Having a bright orange bench in the middle of it really impacts my enjoyment of my property." "The bench is for everyone's enjoyment, Mr. Lawson. Community over individual preference, that is our motto. But who else even uses that overlook? It is at the end of my driveway. Nobody walks up there. They will now that there is seating. We are encouraging more community engagement with our natural surroundings. There are actually plans to install additional benches at 3 other locations. Can we at least discuss the color or the placement? Maybe move it to the side so it does not block the central view." Patricia folded her hands in her lap. The bench placement was carefully considered by our landscaping committee. That location provides the optimal view and is set back appropriately from the edge for safety reasons. As for the color, orange was chosen specifically because it is highly visible. We had an incident 2 years ago where a child wandered off during a community event. High visibility furnishings help us keep track of where people are. There are no community events near my house. Not yet, but we are planning a community photography day next month and your overlook is on the tour. I felt something twist in my stomach. "You are bringing people to my property?" "To the community overlook, yes. It is public space, Mr. Lawson." I left Patricia's house feeling worse than when I had arrived. Over the next few days, I tried to go about my normal routine, but that orange bench mocked me every time I looked outside. I stopped taking my morning coffee out there. The magic was gone. Then, on Wednesday morning, I woke to voices. I looked out my bedroom window and saw 2 women sitting on the bench, drinking coffee and chatting. They were not doing anything wrong, technically, but it felt like a violation. My private sanctuary had become a public gathering spot. I watched from inside as they took selfies with the mountain view in the background. One of them waved at my house, possibly seeing me in the window. I stepped back, feeling like a prisoner in my own home. That afternoon, I called a property attorney in Denver. His name was Michael Chen, and he had good reviews for dealing with HOA disputes. "So the question is whether the easement allows them to make permanent improvements," Michael said after I explained the situation. "Can you send me all your documents?" I scanned and emailed everything. He called back 2 hours later. "Okay, I have good news and bad news. The good news is the easement language is somewhat vague about what constitutes reasonable improvements. The bad news is fighting this would probably cost you $15,000 to $20,000 in legal fees, minimum, and there is no guarantee you would win. $20,000. HOA disputes are messy, Xavier. They have insurance and a legal fund. They can drag things out forever. Even if you win, you lose because of the cost and the time. My honest advice: try to work something out with them directly, maybe compromise on the bench location or appearance. I thanked him and hung up, feeling defeated. $20,000 to maybe move a bench. It was insane. That evening, Rick came over with a six-pack of beer. "Heard about your bench situation," he said, settling into my couch. "Patricia called a special meeting yesterday to discuss uncooperative homeowners. Pretty sure that was about you." "Fantastic. I am the community villain for not wanting a neon bench in my yard. You know what your problem is? You are trying to fight Patricia directly. That woman thrives on conflict. The more you push, the harder she will push back." "So what am I supposed to do?" Rick grinned. "You got to think creative. Patricia follows the rules obsessively, right? So you got to follow the rules too, but in ways she does not expect." I did not know what he meant then, but over the next few days, I started paying attention to the bench in a different way. I noticed how it was positioned about 15 feet from the edge of the overlook. I noticed how the ground at that overlook was not exactly stable. Colorado clay soil, mixed with rocky substrate, sitting on a slope. I had actually been a little concerned about erosion when I first bought the place, and had made sure to keep vegetation growing near the edge to hold the soil. The bench was bolted into soil that had not been properly prepared. They had just drilled into the ground and called it done. No concrete footings, no proper foundation. I could see where they had disturbed the grass and topsoil around the bolts. I also started reading the HOA bylaws more carefully, especially the sections about property maintenance and liability. There was an interesting clause that stated homeowners were not responsible for damage to HOA installations on easement properties, unless the damage was caused by intentional negligence. An idea started forming. The overlook extended about 30 feet from solid ground to its furthest point, a finger of land jutting into space above the valley. The bench sat near the middle of this finger. The edges had always been a bit crumbly, especially after rain or snow melt. I had been careful to maintain plants along the perimeter to prevent erosion. But what if I stopped maintaining it quite so carefully? What if I let nature take its course? I spent a weekend researching soil erosion, water drainage, and natural landscape changes. Colorado's climate was perfect for gradual erosion. The freeze-thaw cycle alone could work wonders on unstable soil. Heavy spring rains would help too. The trick was that I could not be seen as deliberately causing damage. I had to make it look completely natural. First, I stopped watering the native plants along the overlook's edge. They were hardy and would survive, but they would not thrive without supplemental water during dry spells. Their roots would be less effective at holding soil. Second, I noticed that the HOA installation had actually disrupted the natural drainage pattern. Before, water would flow around the overlook, but their crew had torn up some of the ground cover while installing the bench, and now water was pooling in new places. I did not fix this. I just let it be. Third, I took Rick's advice and went to every HOA meeting, acting like the most concerned and engaged homeowner in the community. I volunteered for the landscaping committee. I asked thoughtful questions about maintenance schedules and safety protocols. Patricia seemed pleased that I had come around. At one meeting in late March, I brought up concerns about erosion management throughout the community. "I have noticed some areas where water drainage might be causing problems," I said during the open comment period. "Especially on slopes and overlooks. I wonder if we should have a professional assessment done to make sure our scenic areas are stable." Patricia nodded approvingly. "That is an excellent suggestion, Xavier. However, professional geological surveys are quite expensive. Perhaps we can table that until next year's budget." "I understand," I said. I just worry about liability if something were to happen. Our insurance covers natural events, Patricia assured me, but I appreciate your diligence. Perfect. Now it was on record that I had raised concerns. April brought heavy rains to Pine Ridge. Colorado was experiencing an unusually wet spring, and the rain just kept coming. I watched from my window as water streamed across the Overlook, finding new channels and paths. The area around the bench started to develop a slight depression where water pooled before draining off the edge. The bench itself seemed fine, but the ground around it was definitely softer. I could see it when people sat down. The bench would shift slightly, not much, but enough to notice if you were paying attention. In early May, Patricia organized her community photography day. About 20 people showed up, including a local photographer who was leading a workshop on landscape photography. They all tramped up my driveway to the Overlook, chattering and setting up tripods. I stayed inside but watched through the window. Multiple people sat on the bench, sometimes 2 or 3 at a time. Each time someone sat, I saw the ground compress a little more. The metal brackets holding the bench were loosening in the soft soil. After they left, I walked out to examine the damage. There were footprints everywhere in the now muddy ground. The area around the bench looked like it had been thoroughly trampled. The bench itself now sat at a slight angle, maybe a degree or 2 off level. Not enough for anyone to really notice, but enough for me to see the progress. I took photos, documenting everything from multiple angles, just for my records. The next week, I filed a maintenance request through the HOA's online portal, noting that the bench appeared to be slightly unstable and might need servicing. I used very careful language, expressing concern for community safety. Patricia emailed back within an hour. "Thank you for your concern, Xavier. I will have our maintenance team inspect it." 2 days later, a maintenance guy showed up. He was a contractor named Dale who did odd jobs for the HOA. I walked out to meet him, playing the part of the concerned homeowner. "Hey, thanks for coming out," I said. "I just noticed it seemed a bit wobbly. Probably just needs the bolts tightened." Dale checked the bench, tugging on it and sitting down a few times. "Feels okay to me. Ground is a bit soft from all the rain, but the bench is solid." "Great, that is good to hear. I just wanted to make sure it was safe." Dale tightened the bolts anyway, really cranking them down. I knew this would actually make things worse in the long run. Tightening bolts in loose soil would only accelerate the loosening process as the ground continued to soften and shift. "All set," Dale said, giving me a thumbs up. I thanked him and watched him leave. Over the next few weeks, I noticed subtle changes. The bench was now closer to the edge than before, maybe a foot or so. Not because anyone had moved it, but because the edge was slowly eroding backward. The freeze-thaw cycle, combined with the heavy rains and increased foot traffic, was eating away at the cliff face. I started measuring from my house to the bench every few days. In 3 weeks, the bench had moved 6 inches closer to my house, which meant the edge had eroded 6 inches back toward the bench. I documented everything with dated photographs, always making sure to include reference points that would show the relative positions over time. In June, we had a brief dry spell, which actually helped my cause. The soil dried out and became more brittle. Then, when the rains returned in early July, the water hit harder and cut deeper channels. One morning in mid-July, I woke to find the bench sitting at a noticeable angle. One side had sunk about 3 inches lower than the other. It looked drunk, tilted and off-kilter. The bright orange paint seemed to highlight its distress. I immediately filed another maintenance request. "The bench is now visibly tilted and appears unsafe. Please inspect immediately." This time Dale came out with Patricia. She stood with her hands on her hips, staring at the bench like it had personally offended her. "I do not understand," she said. "This was professionally installed." "Ground's real soft here," Dale said, kneeling to examine the soil. "All this rain we have been having, plus this is pretty close to the edge. Natural erosion, I would guess." "Can you fix it?" Patricia asked. "I can re-level it and set it deeper, but if the ground keeps shifting, we will have the same problem. Might need to relocate it further back." Patricia turned to me. "Xavier, would you object to moving the bench back toward your property line, further from the edge?" I pretended to consider this carefully. "Where exactly were you thinking?" Dale walked around, examining the ground. "Probably needs to go back about 10–15 feet to get to really solid ground. That would put it basically in line with my driveway, completely blocking the Overlook view." Patricia could see this too. "That would not work," she said. "The whole point is the view." "Well, other option is to pour concrete footings," Dale said. "Real deep ones with rebar and everything. That would hold it." "How much would that cost?" "Few thousand, probably. Have to bring in equipment, do it right." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. I could see her mental calculations. Spending thousands to secure a bench she had probably paid a few $100s for. "Let me discuss this with the board," she said. "In the meantime, please put up caution tape so nobody uses it." Over the next week, the tilted orange bench sat wrapped in yellow caution tape, looking like a crime scene. I heard through Rick that there was intense debate at the emergency board meeting. Some members wanted to invest in the concrete footings. Others thought they should just remove the bench and cut their losses. Patricia reportedly insisted they could not let one difficult homeowner dictate HOA policy. I continued to be the perfect, concerned citizen. I sent a thoughtful email to the board offering to contribute to a community safety fund for proper installation of amenities. I attended the next regular meeting and politely asked about the status of the bench repair, noting that the caution tape was becoming an eyesore. Then nature gave me a gift. On July 23rd, a massive thunderstorm rolled through Pine Ridge. We got 3 inches of rain in about 4 hours, with intense downpours that overwhelmed the normal drainage. I watched from my window as rivers of water cascaded across the Overlook, cutting new gullies and channels. The next morning, I walked out to survey the damage and almost laughed out loud. The entire section of ground where the bench sat had subsided about 6 inches. The bench now tilted at almost a 30-degree angle, one end pointing at the sky like it was trying to escape. The caution tape fluttered in the morning breeze. More importantly, the edge of the Overlook had eroded back to within about 5 feet of the bench. You could see where chunks of soil had simply fallen away, leaving a fresh exposed face of clay and rock. I took extensive photos and immediately called the non-emergency number for the Park County Sheriff's Office. "Hi, I want to report a potential safety hazard on my property," I said. "We have an HOA installation that is now dangerously close to an eroded cliff edge, and I am concerned someone might get hurt." They sent a deputy out that afternoon. His name was Officer Martinez, and he took the situation seriously once he saw it. "Yeah, that is not safe," he said, examining the tilted bench and the crumbling edge. "Who's responsible for this?" "The HOA installed it. I have been requesting maintenance, but they have not resolved it." Officer Martinez took photos and notes. "I am going to have to red tag this. Nobody can use it until it is either properly secured or removed. I will file a report with the county." He attached an official notice to the bench declaring it a safety hazard. This was better than I could have hoped for. Patricia called me within 2 hours of the officer leaving. "Xavier, what did you do?" Her voice was tight with anger. "I reported a safety hazard, Patricia. That bench is dangerous now. What if a kid climbed on it and it gave way? You called the police on the HOA. I called them about an unsafe condition on my property. The county has a right to know about hazards. This is ridiculous. The bench is fine. The bench is tilted at a 30-degree angle and sitting 5 feet from a crumbling cliff edge. It is not fine. You have been sabotaging it, she said. I know you have. You have wanted that bench gone from day one. I have done nothing but report problems and request maintenance, all documented through the HOA portal. I even offered to contribute to a repair fund. We will see about this, Patricia said and hung up. The next week was quiet, but I could feel the storm building. Then, I received a certified letter from the HOA attorney. It accused me of deliberately causing erosion and demanded that I pay for professional stabilization of the overlook and proper installation of the bench with concrete footings. The total estimated cost, $18,000. I had been expecting something like this. I took the letter to Michael Chen, my attorney in Denver. This is interesting, Michael said, reading through it. They are claiming you had a duty to prevent erosion, but the easement language actually puts maintenance responsibility on the HOA for any installations they make. So, I do not have to pay. Not only do you not have to pay, I think you have a pretty good case that they are liable for any damage to your property caused by their improper installation. They did not do soil testing, they did not pour proper footings, and they ignored your maintenance requests. The sheriff's report helps too. What do? Write a response denying all liability. Point out their failure to properly maintain their own installation. And then, I would strongly suggest you file a formal complaint with the HOA board about the safety hazard they created. Put them on the defensive. I did exactly that. My response letter was detailed and cited specific bylaw sections about HOA maintenance responsibilities. I included a timeline of my maintenance requests and their inadequate responses. I attached photos showing the progressive deterioration. And I ended with a demand that they remove the bench immediately, or I would seek legal remedies for the ongoing nuisance and safety hazard. Patricia called an emergency meeting 2 days later. The meeting notice said it was to discuss member property issues, which everyone knew meant me. I showed up early and sat in the front row. About 30 homeowners attended, which was high turnout for Pine Ridge. Word had spread about the drama. Patricia started the meeting by presenting the situation from the HOA's perspective. According to her, I had been uncooperative from the start, had failed to maintain my property properly, and was now trying to blame the HOA for natural erosion. Mr. Lawson has created a hostile situation, Patricia said. He is costing the HOA thousands in potential legal fees and repair costs because he does not want to share a community amenity. When it was my turn to speak, I stood and faced the room. I want to be clear about what happened here, I said. The HOA installed a bench on unstable ground without proper preparation or footings. I requested maintenance multiple times. Those requests were ignored or inadequately addressed. The bench has now become a safety hazard, which is why the county red tagged it. I have not done anything to cause this situation except try to prevent someone from getting hurt. I pulled out a folder and started passing around copies of my documentation. Photos, maintenance requests, response times, everything in chronological order. You will see that I raised concerns about erosion at a March meeting. I requested maintenance in May and again in June. The HOA's own contractor noted the ground was soft and unstable. Despite this, no proper repairs were made. This is not about me being difficult. This is about the HOA failing to properly maintain a structure they insisted on installing. Rick stood up from the back of the room. "I have a question for the board. How much did we spend on that bench originally?" Patricia hesitated. "I do not have those figures in front of me." "It was $375, said Karen, the HOA treasurer. "I have the receipt." "And how much are we talking about spending to fix it now?" Rick continued. "Estimates range from $5,000 to $8,000 for proper installation," Karen said, looking uncomfortable. "So we are going to spend potentially 20 times the original cost to save a bench that has caused nothing but problems, instead of just admitting it was a bad idea and removing it." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. I could see I was not the only one who thought this was ridiculous. Another homeowner, a woman named Susan who lived near the community entrance, raised her hand. "I also have concerns about the HOA making improvements without proper planning. I received a notice last week about a bench being installed near my property, and now I am worried it will turn into the same mess." Patricia tried to regain control. "The board made a decision about community improvements. We have that right under the bylaws." "The bylaws also say improvements have to be reasonable and properly maintained," I said. "This has been neither." The meeting devolved into a general argument about HOA overreach. Several homeowners expressed frustration about other decisions Patricia had made without adequate community input. It became clear that the bench was just a symptom of larger issues with how Patricia ran the HOA. The meeting ended without any resolution, but I could see the tide had turned. Patricia no longer had unanimous support. Over the next few days, the bench situation continued to deteriorate, literally. Another storm system moved through, and more of the Overlook edge collapsed. The bench was now only about 3 feet from the edge. It looked absurd, this bright orange thing teetering on the brink of falling into the valley below. I received a call from Dale, the maintenance contractor. "Hey Xavier, I just want to give you a heads up," he said. "Patricia wants me to go out there and try to shore up that bench again, but honestly, I do not think it is safe. I told her I would not do it without proper engineering, but she is pushing hard. Do not risk it, Dale. That edge could give way any time." "Yeah, that is what I think too. Just wanted you to know what is going on." 2 days later, I came home from a grocery run to find Patricia and another board member, a guy named Tom, standing near the bench with a shovel and some bags of concrete. "What are you doing?" I asked, walking up the driveway. "Fixing this ourselves since nobody else seems capable," Patricia said, not looking at me. "That is really not safe. The county red tagged it. The county has no jurisdiction over internal HOA matters." "They absolutely do when it is a safety issue." Tom was mixing concrete in a bucket while Patricia dug around one of the bench supports. The ground was so loose that her shovel sank in easily. "You should not be that close to the edge," I said. "Seriously, it is not stable." "Stop telling me what to do on community property," Patricia snapped. I pulled out my phone and started recording. If something went wrong, I wanted documentation that I had warned them. Tom poured concrete into the hole Patricia had dug, and they moved to the next support. As they worked, I noticed small chunks of soil breaking off from the edge, tumbling down into the valley. The ground was actively eroding as they disturbed it. "Patricia, please, you need to stop. Look at the edge." She finally turned to look where I was pointing. Even she could see the fresh breaks in the soil, the way the ground seemed to be crumbling in slow motion. "It is fine," she said, but her voice had less certainty. They finished pouring concrete around all 4 supports and stood back to admire their work. The bench now sat encased in rough concrete collars, still tilted, still too close to the edge, but technically more secured than before. "There," Patricia said. "Problem solved." They left, and I stood there shaking my head. The concrete would take at least 24 hours to cure. I just hoped the ground would hold that long. It did not. At around 3 in the morning, I was awakened by a sound like distant thunder. I sat up in bed, confused, then heard it again. A deep, rumbling crack. I ran to the window and looked out at the overlook. In the moonlight, I could see that something had changed. The bench was gone. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside. As I approached the overlook, I could see what had happened. A section of the edge, roughly 15 feet wide and 8 feet deep, had collapsed. The entire unstable area had given way, taking the bench, Patricia's fresh concrete, and several cubic yards of soil with it. I carefully approached the new edge and shone my light down. Far below, I could make out pieces of orange metal scattered among the rocks and dirt. I called the non-emergency line again, figuring they should know about this. Officer Martinez came out again around 6 in the morning as the sun was rising. "Whole thing just fell off, huh?" he said, surveying the new cliff face. "Happened around 3 this morning. I heard it collapse." "Anyone hurt?" "No, thank God. Nobody was out here." "This is why we red tag things," Officer Martinez said. "For exactly this reason. You said the HOA was trying to fix it yesterday." "Yes, I have video of them pouring concrete despite the red tag." His expression darkened. "I would like to see that video." I showed him the footage of Patricia and Tom working on the bench. Officer Martinez took notes and asked me to send him a copy. "Ignoring a county safety order is a violation," he said. "I will need to file a report about this." They are lucky nobody was on that thing when it went down. After Officer Martinez left, I called Michael Chen and explained what had happened. "Did you cause the collapse?" he asked directly. "No, I literally was asleep when it happened." The ground gave way naturally, exactly like everyone was warned it might. "And you have documentation of your warnings, extensive documentation, including video of the HOA ignoring the red tag and trying to repair it themselves yesterday. Xavier, I think you just won this fight. The HOA created a hazard, ignored warnings, and violated a county safety order. They have no leg to stand on." Patricia called me at 7 in the morning. I almost did not answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "You did this," she said without preamble. "You made this happen." "Patricia, I was asleep. The ground collapsed because it was unstable. Everyone was warned. The county red tagged it. You ignored all of that. You wanted that bench gone from the beginning. You have been undermining it. I wanted a bench that was not in the middle of my view, sure. But I did not make the ground collapse. Erosion did that. Erosion that was made worse by poor installation, heavy traffic, and you digging around the supports yesterday in unstable soil. The HOA will be pursuing legal action. You do what you need to do, Patricia. But you should know that Officer Martinez is filing a report about you violating the county safety order. You might want to talk to your attorney about that before you worry about suing me." She hung up. The next few weeks were tense. The HOA did consult their attorney, who apparently told them they had no case against me and significant liability exposure for the safety violation. The county ended up issuing a citation to the HOA for ignoring the red tag, which came with a fine of $1,500. Meanwhile, several homeowners started circulating a petition to recall Patricia from the board. The bench fiasco had become the final straw for many residents who were tired of her autocratic management style. Rick took the lead on organizing the recall effort. "You know what the funny thing is?" Rick said one evening as we sat on my deck, looking out at the overlook, which now had proper safety fencing around the collapsed section. "That bench probably would have been fine if they had just done it right in the first place. And if Patricia had listened when problems came up instead of being stubborn." "People do not like admitting mistakes," I said. "Yeah, But there is a difference between not admitting a mistake and doubling down on stupid. The recall petition got enough signatures to force a special election. Patricia fought it hard, sending long emails to all homeowners about the dangers of mob rule and giving in to problem owners. But her support had eroded almost as badly as the Overlook. The election was held in September. Patricia lost by a vote of 43 to 12. She was removed from the board, and a new president was elected, a retired engineer named Robert who had always taken a moderate approach to HOA governance. One of Robert's first acts was to issue a formal apology to me on behalf of the HOA for the bench situation. "We should have consulted with you more directly since it was on your property line," he said at the first meeting under his leadership. "And we should have taken the maintenance concerns seriously when they were raised. The board has reviewed our procedures for common area improvements, and we will be requiring proper engineering assessments going forward." The HOA also agreed to repair the Overlook, but with my input this time. We hired a legitimate geotechnical engineer who assessed the entire area and designed a proper stabilization plan. The HOA paid for riprap to be installed along the edge to prevent further erosion, and they restored the native vegetation that had been damaged. They asked if I wanted another bench installed, done properly this time. "No thanks," I said. "I am good." The whole ordeal cost the HOA about $12,000 in repairs, citations, legal fees, and engineering costs. All because Patricia had been too stubborn to admit that maybe, just maybe, installing a bench without proper planning had been a bad idea. As for the county citation, Patricia tried to fight it, arguing that she was acting in her capacity as HOA president, and thus the HOA should be responsible for the fine, not her personally. The county disagreed. She had personally violated the safety order by physically working on the red-tagged bench. She ended up paying the fine herself. I also learned through the community grapevine that Patricia and her husband Tom decided to sell their house and move to Arizona. Too many burned bridges in Pine Ridge. Apparently, by October, life had returned to normal. The Overlook was stabilized, the safety fence was removed once the engineering work was complete, and I was back to taking my morning coffee outside. The view was unchanged, except now I appreciated it even more. Rick came by one evening with beer, and we sat on my deck watching the sunset. "You know, I have lived here 10 years and never seen anyone take down Patricia Hendricks," Rick said. "People have tried. She has outlasted 3 different board rebellions, but you did it with a bench and some erosion." "I just let nature take its course," I said. "Yeah, but you knew it would. That is the genius part. You did not fight her. You just moved the pieces around and let physics do the work." "I moved the bench to the edge," I said. "Metaphorically speaking." "Literally speaking too, I think," Rick said with a grin. "But I did not see anything, and even if I did, that bench moved itself through natural erosion." We clinked bottles and watched an elk herd move across the meadow below. The mountains were turning purple in the fading light. I never admitted to Rick or anyone else exactly what I had done. In truth, I had not done much. I had stopped maintaining erosion control on my own property, which was my right. I had documented safety concerns, which was responsible. I had let water flow naturally rather than redirecting it, which was just allowing natural drainage patterns. The bench had been poorly installed from the start. It would have failed eventually regardless. I just helped the timeline along a bit. The important thing was that Patricia had learned that sometimes the best way to win a fight is not to fight at all. You just have to understand the terrain, know how things will naturally develop, and have the patience to wait. A few months later, in December, I received a Christmas card from the new HOA board. It featured a photo of the community entrance with tasteful decorations. Inside, Robert had written a personal note. "Thank you for your patience and dedication to community safety. We appreciate members who care enough to speak up." I smiled and put the card on my mantel. Then I poured myself a whiskey and walked out to the Overlook. The winter air was crisp and clean. Snow dusted the mountain peaks. An owl hooted somewhere in the trees below. This was why I had bought this place. This view, this peace, this connection to something bigger than HOA politics and neighborhood drama. The bench was gone. The orange eyesore had tumbled into the valley and been hauled away as debris. The Overlook was mine again, or at least mine to enjoy without intrusion. I thought about Patricia sometimes, wondering if she had learned anything from the experience. Probably not. People like her rarely did. They just moved on to the next community and started the same patterns over again. But Pine Ridge had learned something. The new board was more collaborative, more careful, more willing to listen. Robert actually called homeowners before making decisions about their properties. Imagine that. The community improved in small ways. The heavy-handed enforcement of petty rules eased up. People started actually enjoying their neighborhood again, instead of living in fear of violation notices. A few longtime residents told me they had been considering moving because of Patricia, but were now glad they had stayed. As for me, I settled into a comfortable routine. Work went well. I took up photography and spent weekends capturing the changing seasons from my Overlook. I even submitted a few shots to local galleries, and one sold for $500. I dated a woman named Tracy Allen for a while. She was a teacher in Colorado Springs, and she loved coming up to Pine Ridge on weekends. We would hike and cook dinner and sit on my deck watching the stars. She thought the whole bench story was hilarious. "You are quietly dangerous," she said one night. "You look like such a normal guy, but you took down the HOA president with Erosion. That is some supervillain stuff." "I prefer to think of it as applied geology," I said. We broke up amicably after about 6 months. She wanted someone closer to the city, and I was not interested in leaving my mountain sanctuary. We stayed friends, though, and she still texts me sometimes asking for Overlook photos. The following spring, the HOA held its annual meeting. Robert stood up and gave a report about the community's finances and activities. We were actually running a surplus for the first time in years, because we were not hemorrhaging money on legal disputes and poorly planned projects. "I want to thank everyone for making this a great year," Robert said. "We have learned a lot about working together and respecting individual property rights while still maintaining community standards. Special thanks to Xavier Lawson for his continued service on the landscaping committee and for his patience during last year's challenges." People actually applauded. It felt surreal. A year ago, I had been the community troublemaker. Now I was being thanked at the annual meeting. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to talk to me. Some wanted advice about dealing with other HOA issues. Others just wanted to say they appreciated what I had done. An older woman named Margaret, who lived at the other end of the development, pulled me aside. "I never told anyone this," she said quietly, "but 5 years ago, Patricia tried to make me cut down a tree in my yard, said it violated some aesthetic guideline. That tree was planted by my late husband. I was going to move rather than cut it down. But then I found an old survey that showed the tree was actually just outside the HOA's jurisdiction by about 2 feet. Patricia backed off, but she never forgave me. She made my life hell for years with petty violations. So thank you for what you did. You freed a lot of us." I had not realized the bench issue was part of a much larger pattern. Patricia had been bullying homeowners for years, and people had been suffering in silence. That conversation made me feel like the whole ordeal had been worth it. I had not just won a personal battle. I had helped change the culture of the entire community. Life continued peacefully through the summer. I took clients, made good money, and enjoyed my sanctuary. The Overlook remained bench-free and beautiful. Erosion was under control thanks to the professional remediation. Everything was exactly as it should be. Then, in August, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Patricia. The letter was surprisingly humble. She apologized for her behavior and admitted she had let her position go to her head. She said moving to Arizona had given her perspective, and she realized she had made Pine Ridge miserable for a lot of people, including herself. "I am not asking for forgiveness," she wrote. "I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I did wrong. You were right about the bench. It was poorly planned and poorly executed. More importantly, I should have listened when you raised concerns instead of treating you like an adversary. I hope you are enjoying your view." I read the letter twice, not sure how to feel. Was this genuine, or was it some kind of manipulation? With Patricia, it was hard to tell. I decided it did not matter. I wrote back a brief note saying I appreciated the apology and wished her well in Arizona. Then I filed the letter away and moved on. Some people might have wanted to gloat or hold a grudge, but I had gotten what I wanted. The bench was gone, the Overlook was restored, and the HOA was functioning properly. Patricia's personal journey was her own business. By the fall of that year, the whole incident had faded into community lore. New residents would hear the story and laugh about the Great Bench War. Older residents would shake their heads and remember the chaos. Rick and I still joked about it sometimes. "Remember when you totally did not use erosion to destroy HOA property?" he would say. "I have no idea what you are talking about," I would reply. "That was a natural geological event." "Right. Just like it was natural that you stopped watering and natural that the drainage changed and natural that you kept detailed documentation of everything. Proper record keeping is important." We would both laugh and crack another beer. The truth was complicated. Had I deliberately allowed erosion to undermine the bench? Sort of. Had I broken any laws or HOA rules? No. I had simply stopped doing extra maintenance on my own property and let nature run its course. Everything that happened was predictable and preventable if the HOA had done things right in the first place. I sometimes thought about the chain of small decisions that led to the outcome. If Patricia had been willing to compromise on the bench location or color, if they had hired an engineer from the start, if they had responded properly to my maintenance requests, if Patricia had not been so stubborn about admitting a mistake, any one of those things could have changed the outcome. But Patricia had chosen confrontation at every turn, and that had been her downfall. The Overlook itself became a symbol for the community. It represented the balance between individual property rights and community needs. It showed what happened when leaders acted without proper planning or input. It demonstrated that sometimes the little guy could win against institutional authority if he was patient and strategic. Local newspapers even picked up the story when the recall happened. There was a small article in the Denver Post about HOA overreach and how one Colorado community had pushed back. They interviewed Robert, who gave a diplomatic summary of events without mentioning me by name. "Sometimes organizations lose sight of their purpose," Robert told the reporter. "Our purpose is to maintain property values and community standards, not to exercise power over individual homeowners. We have to remember we are neighbors first, not rulers and subjects." I still have that article somewhere in a drawer. Years have passed now since the bench incident. Pine Ridge remains a peaceful community with reasonable HOA governance. Robert served 2 terms as president and then passed the role to someone else. The board has continued to function well, making collaborative decisions and respecting homeowner input. My Overlook remains my favorite place on earth. I have upgraded my outdoor furniture, adding a small fire pit and some comfortable chairs. I host the occasional gathering, inviting neighbors to enjoy the view. But mostly I keep it to myself, a private sanctuary where I can decompress from work and life. The area where the bench used to sit has filled in with natural grasses and wildflowers. You would never know anything had been there unless you looked carefully at the soil patterns. Nature has a way of erasing human mistakes if given time. I learned a lot from that experience. I learned that fighting directly is not always the best strategy. I learned that documentation and patience can be more powerful than anger. I learned that communities function better when leaders listen instead of dictate. And I learned that sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to simply move it to the edge and let nature handle the rest. The Overlook taught me about erosion, not just of soil but of authority. Patricia's power had seemed absolute until suddenly it was not. Like a cliff edge, it held firm until one day it just gave way, taking everything with it. I have carried those lessons into other parts of my life. In business negotiations, I am more patient now, more willing to let situations develop naturally rather than forcing outcomes. In relationships, I try to listen and compromise rather than insisting on my way. In community involvement, I work collaboratively and give people the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had just accepted the bench. If I had swallowed my frustration and learned to live with that orange eyesore in my viewpoint. Would it have been easier? Probably. Would it have been worth it? No. There is something important about standing up for what matters to you, even when it seems petty to others. That Overlook mattered to me. It was why I bought the house. It was where I found peace. I had every right to fight for it, but I also learned that how you fight matters. If I had been aggressive and confrontational like Patricia wanted, I would have lost. Legal battles would have drained my bank account and my energy. Instead, I used patience, documentation, and natural forces to achieve my goal. Some people called it passive-aggressive. Maybe it was. But it was also effective and legal and ultimately better for everyone. The HOA learned valuable lessons about governance. The community got better leadership. And I got my view back, standing on my Overlook today, watching the sun set behind the mountains. I feel nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for this place, for this view, for the peace I found here. Gratitude for neighbors like Rick who supported me. Gratitude even for Patricia in a strange way, because fighting her taught me things about myself I would not have learned otherwise. The bench is gone. The view remains. And I am exactly where I should be, drinking coffee at sunrise and whiskey at sunset, watching the seasons change across the Colorado mountains, the undisputed master of my small domain. Sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all. It is just living well in the place you love, without bright orange benches blocking your view.